Welcome to Point of View. I'm Pastor Josh Barnes. This is Justin Barnes, and the Daily Wire is our subject today. Not as in as positive a light as we usually talk about the Daily Wire. Usually, we use their stuff and we talk about how some of the great things that they point out and they bring out. They are a conservative organization. We're going to talk about, are they conservative enough, or are they actually what's the word, Justin, that we're going to use here?
The term that we're discussing is Proto-Woke.
Is the Daily Wire going woke? Okay, well that's the sort of like clickbait title that we'll probably use. All right, so here's the question: the Daily Wire has a new service, it's connected with the Daily Wire. It's called
product.
Jeremy's Razors. It's a new product, and I suppose it's kind of like a Dollar Shave Club type of a thing. It's just a different razor service out there. And we're going to play the video for you. And we're going to ask, does this video mean that the Daily Wire, which is sort of like the company behind Jeremy's Razors, is the Daily Wire going woke? And you're going to think, what? How does this possibly? And then we're going to unpack it and show why there's an argument for that. And we want you to put your comments in the comments if you're watching on YouTube or however you're watching. Let us know what you think. We're going to start off with a video. Anything that you want to put in there real quick before we play the video, Justin?
I would just direct people, because a lot of this came from, I want to give credit where credit's due, a lot of this was sparked by Toby Sumpter and his blog, Having Two Legs. And he does a recorded version of his blog as well. So I don't want to pretend like this originated with us. This was a discussion that started between us from his video on that. So you can go and see that if you'd like. Outside that, I'm happy to start jumping into it.
Okay, let's roll the ad. This is called the Jeremy's Razor ad, and it is supposedly the best ad ever.
Do you remember when there were two genders and only 1.5 of them had to shave their mustaches? Oh, hi. I'm Jeremy Boring, CEO and God King of the Daily Wire. Harry's Razors used to advertise on our shows. They're a great product, and we were happy to do it. That's before some peon who works for me went and said that boys are boys and girls are girls, and that was just too much for Harry's. They condemned our views held by millions of Americans and virtually every human who's walked the planet until about 15 minutes ago, as inexcusable. And they dropped their ads from our network because of what they called values misalignment. You're damn right our values are misaligned. And it's not just Harry's either. Gillette razors used to be the best a man could get. Then they decided that men are too toxic. Unless you're the kind of man who teaches his daughter to shave her beard. If that makes sense to you, keep buying Gillette. But if you've had enough of the woke bullshit, and you're tired of paying companies like Harry's and Gillette to hate you, then buy my new razor instead.
Oh, sorry about that.
Behold, Jeremy's Razors. Yes, they're real. Yes, they're fabulous. But Jeremy, you say, you're a svelte silver fox with a salt and pepper beard that's the envy of lesser men. You're damn right I am. And I want to be clear that shaving with the Jeremy's Razor won't actually make you look more like me.
Yes, you're giving me fierce. You're giving me power.
Could make you look more like this guy, though. And that's the most homoerotic moment you'll ever get from a Jeremy's Razor commercial. What kind of man shaves with a Jeremy's Razor? I don't know. How about cowboys, firefighters, those guys that shot Osama bin Laden? I mean, no, none of those guys have ever even heard of a Jeremy's Razor, but imagine how much more manly they'd be if they had. Right now, you're probably wondering if this whole thing is a joke. Sure it is. But that doesn't mean it isn't real, or that it won't be the best shave of your life. Harry's Razors doesn't want your business. I do. They seem to hate you, and well, I can't say that I love you, but I don't mean you any specific harm.
Okay, and it's actually another minute of it. I think that's probably enough of it to make the point. Okay, so you're probably watching that being like, no, that was super conservative. How is that woke? Justin, will you make the argument that is made for this being a proto-woke commercial from the Daily Wire?
Well, the first major flaw in it is that there's a lot of Michael Knowles in it, and that's just dreadful. But no, the main argument that there is basically is that the idea of it being proto-woke would be that you don't fight 2022 wokeness with like 1960s and 70s wokeness. In other words, today we have this confusion about men and women and, you know, which gender and sex and all of that stuff, and what is a woman, as one of the Daily Wire hosts like to say a lot. But you don't fight that with what got us there. And what got us there was a culture that said that it was manly to drive fast cars, which there's nothing wrong with that. Shoot flamethrowers, which there's nothing wrong with that. Be ripped and muscle bound, and there's nothing wrong with that. And hang out with scantily clad women. Now we've run into something that's wrong. The main problem that there is with this commercial is that they're in pursuit of this manliness, obviously the theme of the commercial. They're throwing in things that got us to where we are now. When we strayed away from the idea that manliness, when it came to sexuality, was one man with one woman for life, and that sexuality was to be expressed in the marriage bed, which is honorable and undefiled, according to God, when it started being brought into outside of that, and women started showing off their bodies with feminism and all that sort of stuff, now we're starting to leave the anchor, the foundation for fighting back against wokeness to begin with. In other words, you're rewinding the tape back to an earlier part in the tape, but it's still the same tape. And for people who are kind of young, you may not know what a tape is, but if you rewind the movie, it's still the same movie. That is what got us to where we are. Sexual perversion, and in the early stages, is what got us to sexual perversion in the terminal stages today. So that would be the main argument against this, is that the proto-wokeness is fighting the wokeness of 2022 with the wokeness of 1970. So the pushing of the sexual boundaries back then was women being scantily clad, which he's got two women hanging off his arms like he's a pimp the entire time, and their chests are darn near bare. And that would be... I agree with Toby Sumpter's assessment that it was almost a really, really great commercial, because it nails all the manly stuff, except for it sneaks in poison into the rest of it.
Yeah, somebody told Jeremy, hey, listen, or Jeremy, I would like to think that Jeremy didn't purposely do this. Somebody told Jeremy, listen, if we want all the manly, we want to hit all the manly buttons, we got to have fire, we got to have everything, and we got to have bare naked women, you know, or not. Yeah. Okay, these women are not bare naked, but they are purposefully revealing themselves in a way to attract the lust of men. And hanging on his arm as if women, multiple women hanging on the man's arm makes that man more manly. And I think that's a fair point. That's not what makes a man more manly. But here's, I think, the question: is that actual? Can we prove that is actually the source where wokeness comes from? Wokeness comes from men being promiscuous. Is that really where wokeness comes from?
No, but I think it's the same principle that causes you to say this commercial is the nail on the head. The same principle that makes you say that is the same principle that is what wokeness comes from. And here's what I mean. what Jeremy Boring and Jeremy's Razors and the Daily Wire in general are doing with this commercial are promoting traditional masculinity, not biblical masculinity. A lot of it has some crossover, but where we've departed from biblical masculinity is in the principle that a man with a bunch of different women is a positive thing, and the stud who gets all the girls is really manly. That is traditional masculinity. That is not biblical masculinity. And this is why I say it's the same principle. And this is why I would argue that it's a good point to say this is the Daily Wire in general, is because when they make their arguments for, masculinity, or be it the gender confusion or abortion or whatever the issue is, their arguments are purposefully not biblical. And there's your problem right there. As much as one of my favorite shows to listen to is the Matt Walsh Show. Matt Walsh will be very clear when saying about abortion that we're specifically not drawing God into the conversation. We're purposefully not drawing God into the conversation, even though he believes in God. The problem is the foundation of your argument, the foundation of your movement, if it is not biblical, when you start a little off track, then once you get down the road, you will be very off track. That's why I say they're the same principle. We started back in the 1970s where, hey, at least we understood men and women go together. It's not two guys, it's not two girls. We understood it was a guy and a girl. But we started a little off track back then, where sexuality was not contained just within marriage. And then it just exploded and continued, and we are reaping what we sowed. This is just the end result.
So here's the way I see it, and I know that's so you started out presenting that as the argument. This is there anything in that argument that you just presented that you would say I disagree with this part of the argument, or is that really where you stand personally?
I think that's probably where I stand on this one, because I can't. The more I've thought through this issue, because I thought the whole idea of the Daily Wire going proto-woke, I was like, okay, that's a little bit much. Maybe it was just a misstep. They made a mistake, but this isn't descriptive of them generally. The problem is, the more I've listened to the Daily Wire shows, the more I've realized how much it's the same principle that led to this problem in this commercial, and that is a departure from the Bible as the source and grounding of your authority, from which you then work out from.
Yeah. So let me point out where I agree, and I think the place where I would disagree is going to be very small, actually, because what I think is that this argument really does point out some real one really important fact, and that is that there is we can go backwards to where what we're dealing with today came from, right? We're seeing now the transgender issue, and we're seeing on the horizon the pedophilia issue and other issues that are locked and loaded and ready to come next. Where did these issues come from? Well, they came after we changed the definition of marriage, and we said that and we changed really once we gave up the fight on homosexuality. This was the natural next step. This was the progression. So, okay, well, where did the fight over homosexuality come from? Well, that came from sexual promiscuity and from the sexual revolution in America, when people, hey, look, we're all animals anyway. We're all just evolved out of dust. So listen, just do whatever you want to do, and have whatever fun it is. You only live once. And so this mindset of just sex doesn't need to be confined to marriage. It doesn't have to be for even necessarily even for a committed couple, let alone for a marriage. Has the pornographic industry that has exploded since that has led to the homosexuality problem, has led to the transgender problem. These things all stem from that. And I think you make a really good point, that if we're going to fix what we're dealing with now. We can't just fix the symptoms. We have got to rewind the clock back before the progression started. And the progression started with the sexual revolution. We've got to go back to saying, listen, sex is a serious... By the way, this is also why we have the abortion issue. Without the sexual revolution, we'd have no abortion issue. That's all about. The whole point of the abortion issue is I want to have sex with whoever I want, whenever I want, however I want it, and I don't want to deal with the consequences, right? So unless we can rewind back before then we're not going to fix the problems we're having with wokeism today. And I think that's a fair point to say that that Jeremy's Razors is not rewinding far enough back. They're going back to the sexual revolution. At that point, this idea of manliness being connected with a man with having multiple women on his arm is somehow a positive thing, positive manliness. That's not positive manliness. That's negative manliness. Positive manliness is being dedicated and committed to your wife, going home, taking care of your children, being an example for your sons, for your daughters, caring for your daughters, making sure that any boy knows that they're never good enough for your daughters, making sure that your daughters aren't dressing in a way that is provocative to the boys. Listen, I know this. My daughter's 12, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I've got like 5 years, and then I'm going to be dealing with all this, and it better not be any sooner than that. These are the types of things that are really manly that we need to be encouraging. And I do think that this commercial fell short of that. But I'm going to disagree, and I'm not going to go as far as to say that the Daily Wire is going woke. And here's part of my reason. While I do agree that true conservatism stems from a biblical worldview, and without a biblical worldview, you can't ultimately be conservative. But I won't say that without a biblical worldview, you are by default proto-woke. Although that is where it leads. And I think Ben Shapiro has even addressed this in a recent question and answer that he's put on YouTube. He did not talk about the Jeremy's Razors, but he was asked this question. I want to play it for you. Here we go.
Why do you think modesty matters? There are other cultures in which women are wearing less than they are wearing in America, and those women are not sexualized. Don't you think that modesty is a social construct and that men should just be taught not to sexualize and objectify women, as opposed to women needing to alter their appearance just to appease men's primordial and animalistic desires?
So I think that the biological drive for men to procreate with women is not mutable. The basic belief that if you just teach men not to think that boobs are a thing, that men will then think that boobs are not a thing, I think that is likely untrue. Now, are there cultural differences on this sort of stuff? Absolutely. The basic notion of modesty is a good one, because what that really is saying is that you're supposed to see women for more than just their body parts. There's an innate human and mammalian drive to procreate, and nakedness is the precondition generally to procreation. The idea that it is good for women to be more modest with regard to men, so that men are more likely to see them as fellow human beings as opposed to sexual targets. That is a protective mechanism for women that is good. You could also teach men that they ought to behave themselves, and you should teach men that. And that nothing a woman does or wears justifies a man treating that woman badly or as a sex object. If you dress immodestly, men are more likely to look at you as a sexual object, which is specifically why we have entire industries dedicated to people doing immodest things, so that people will look at them for money.
So I'd like to make 2 points before you jump in and comment on that, Justin. First, that statement by Ben Shapiro does seem to strange after watching the video, right? After watching the Jeremy's Razors ad. It doesn't seem to be consistent, and perhaps they just didn't pick up on that. Maybe it was recommended by their ad guy, and it was something that slipped through. But you'd think that Jeremy, standing next to these women, would think, yeah, maybe this isn't the right way to go, guys. So what Ben Shapiro said there, I think, is good and right. But I think there's another thing to be had, and that is that he didn't argue it from Scripture, right? He's using a biblical worldview, but he's not founding it on the Bible. So there is that. I believe what is a conservative biblical worldview in which he's looking at the world, but he's not recognizing the actual foundation is in the Bible, which I think is a flaw in his argument. However, I still think it's a conservative biblical worldview, whether he's using the Bible to prove it or not. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, this is where several things. I mean, first of all, you're right. It does seem weird to hear that from Ben Shapiro, who started the company with Jeremy Boring, when that commercial's out there from Jeremy Boring, because Ben Shapiro says, you can't just have, guys ignore the fact that, hey, there's boobs, but the whole commercial, there, two women were there as billboards for, hey, there's boobs. Was what was going on. So you can't just duct tape over that. It happened. That was traditional masculinity that they were calling back to, not biblical masculinity. But then again, there's the whole problem, is that Ben Shapiro is very much into the traditions of America and, what we used to be, and conserving those traditions, but not rooting it in a immutable, unchanging foundation. And that's where the real problem comes from. I mean, this is the same thing when Shapiro argues on abortion. He'll argue that the woman is a victim and that she can't be punished for it because she's a victim just as much as the kid is a victim, even though you wouldn't get that from a biblical worldview. So it's the same kind of thing where we can be really close and we can have even what I would say is like co-belligerence in the fight. And I think Toby Sumpter even worded it that way in his blog post. But there has to be a recognition that we're coming from this two fundamentally different places. And when they make arguments, we need to be able to take them back to Scripture. Because you actually used a phrase, and I'm going to give you a little critique here, and it might just be a vernacular, how you worded it thing. But you said they're not winding the clock back far enough. I think winding the clock back is missing the point. The point is not winding the clock back. The point is, okay, as a conservative, I conserve the things that are already good in the culture that was shaped by the Christian worldview in the Bible. And then the rest, I go to Scripture and say, where else do we need reform? Because even if you wind back to the 1920s, well, now you have the KKK, and that's not biblical. So it's not about winding the clock back. It's about conforming back to scriptural standards. And that's something the Daily Wire refuses to argue for. They purposefully reject that. And I've seen Ben Shapiro in many Q&As say that. I've seen Matt Walsh say that. I don't know that I've seen Michael Knowles say that, but I've seen them ask these questions specifically. How do we make these arguments fundamentally without the Bible? And they refuse to go there. But that's the authority you have to come down to. And that's why I say this is the beginning of what got us to where we are.
Right. So, I think that you make a good point. Accepting the things in society that are biblical, rejecting those that are not. When I say rewind the clock, what I'm talking about is I'm coming from the perspective where most people say we need America to get back to what it used to be. When we're talking about conservatism, we're talking about conserving, generally and politically, we're saying conserving the way America was founded, right? As if it was, in the 70s, everything was as it was founded, and now it's not, and it's just been the last 50 years, and that's certainly not true. That's what I mean by saying we need to go back a lot further than that to get back to the way America was founded, because America was, even though not all of America's founders were Christian people, it was founded on a biblical worldview and on Christian ideology. And so if we want to get back to that, we're going to have to go a little further than the 70s. We're going to have to get further back. And honestly, there's probably things, I don't know if I've studied one in particular, but there's probably things even in our founding that we as Christians would say, man, that needs to be fixed as well. Maybe
slavery?
Well, yes. My understanding from what I've studied is that slavery actually, it was worked in a poison pill for slavery into the Constitution.
Yeah, no, I agree, but like many of the founders didn't want slavery, but because some of them did, they had to work in the poison pill instead. But what I'm saying is, like, no matter how far back you go in American history, this is the problem with the traditionalist, is whatever time you want to put us back to, there's things we need to clean up, biblically speaking. And if you're just pushing us back to there, you get the Jeremy's razor ad. where you have a lot of really good stuff, and then you've got the poison that kills us and has gotten us to where we are now. That's
Yeah.
what I'm saying, is like, you cannot just push us back. You have to reform to a unchanging standard, which the Daily Wire refuses to do.
All right. So when we come down to it, when we ask the question, is the Daily Wire proto-woke? I'm going to say no, with a giant caveat that they did put out a video that is proto-woke. And you're going to say, yes, the Daily Wire itself is proto-woke. Is that correct?
I'm going to say yes, because what by the definition, the person who coined the term proto-woke, again, Toby Sumpter, you can go watch the video. By the way, Jeremy Boring watched Toby Sumpter's video, tweeted about it, and said, obviously, I disagree with Toby, or I would have done it his way, but he did make fun of Knowles, so I liked the video anyway. But Jeremy Boring has seen this video and is well aware of the critique, so this wouldn't be treading any new ground here. But what I would say, by the definition of what Toby Sumpter defined as proto-woke, which I think is good, is they're pushing us back to a time, but they're still using the wokeness that was traditional back then. So if that's how they're going to argue for things, and if that's the sort of morality they're going to accept, then by definition, by Toby's definition, yes, they are proto-woke. And if they continue on the foundation of sand, they will be, it may be taking a generation or two, but they will be full-blown woke.
By the way, everyone now I'm sure wants to watch Toby's video about this. If you haven't seen it already, we will. If you're watching on YouTube,
it's fantastic. Go watch it.
Yeah, if you're watching on YouTube, we'll link to it below. But Toby Sumpter, you can look up "Is the Daily Wire going woke?" and it should pop up right there at the top of the screen.
Yeah, the title is "The Daily Wire Goes Proto-Woke." Toby Sumpter, having two legs is the blog.
Yeah, I am a big Daily Wire fan. I take that back. I'm a fairly Justin has convinced me to listen to Matt Walsh, and then I became I enjoy Matt Walsh quite a bit, and so I do.
Are you more of a Sweet Baby Gang guy or a Daily Wire?
I don't like
guy?
to call myself Sweet Baby Gang, but
then you don't really. You're not really.
But I really do enjoy listening to him. I actually subscribe to the Daily Wire because of Matt Walsh. And I want to see his video coming out, and we're probably going to review it here on Point of View, the What is a Woman? So I'm in support of almost everything that I've seen from the Daily Wire, but I do think you're onto something on this commercial, and we do need to stand for family values, and that is a huge part of what's brought us to where we are today. The reason that the education system can mess up kids is because there's not a mom and a dad in the home who are modeling how a family ought to be in many cases. And so having real masculinity, fatherhood, and caring for your family, I think is going to be essential to wind back the clock. And that's all the time we have for today. We'll see you next time on Point of View.